Implausibly, inevitably, Futurama is about to be back again. But the world of today is not the same world Futurama's pilot released into, and equally, the show being revived isn't necessarily the same one that caught the world's attention 24 years ago. But what is the essence of Futurama? What made it hit diff, connect so well with the viewership and the culture of its time? Can it work again today? Why might it not? Well, to begin answering these questions, I'd like to introduce you to somebody. Meet Francis Fukuyama. In 1989, Fukuyama was a bureaucrat. He'd started out studying literature before getting all turned around by French structuralism, no shame there, and choosing to refocus his efforts toward something simpler: politics. Throughout the 1980s, he'd found success, working first at a think tank and then in the State Department under Presidents Reagan and H.W. Bush, but Fukuyama had aspirations beyond bureaucracy. As the decade wound down, Fukuyama's first major piece of writing was published, an article in a small magazine, The National Interest. It made ripples in contemporary discourse, but nothing more, nothing seismic, not immediately at least. The article was called The End of History. And it's precisely as dramatic a read as that title suggests. Fukuyama contended that the geopolitical developments throughout the 80s showed something very fundamental happening in world history, and predicted nothing less than, quote, an unabashed victory of economic and political liberalism, which would mark the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy. Basically, he thought the Soviet project was the last significant alternative to Western-style society, a largely free market economy, an individualistic worldview, electoral politics, and so on, and that this last alternative would soon collapse, that this collapse would herald the eternal, worldwide adoption of that democratic capitalist status quo. The blueprint of the late 20th century West, wrote Fukuyama, was the ideal that will govern the material world in the long run. A big claim, right? At the time, people were intrigued by this, but not necessarily on board. It was all well and good looking at perestroika and glasnost and proclaiming the West would win and win forever, but the Eastern Bloc still stood firm, Germany was still divided, and every diplomat in the know expected that division to last indefinitely. So the end of history was a bold idea, delivered with pizzazz, but over-optimistic, putting the faux Hegelian cart ahead of the world event's horse. It seemed that was that. Less than 6 months later, though, the Berlin Wall fell, and Fukuyama's bold stance seemed to be vindicated. 2 years later, the Soviet Union was officially dissolved. 1 year after that, Fukuyama's first full-length book, an elaboration of that key idea of the end of history, hit shelves, and sent its author into the popular consciousness. To many, Fukuyama's arguments now seemed far more persuasive. It seemed like the past few years had already borne them out. As the New Yorker summarizes, the last ideological alternative to liberalism had been eliminated. Fascism had been killed off in the Second World War, and now communism was imploding. In states like China that called themselves communist, political and economic reforms were heading in the direction of a liberal order. It seemed like Fukuyama was right, that the collapse of the Soviet Union signaled not just a victory for America and the West, but the victory, the eternal victory the end of history had foretold. There is more to Fukuyama's end of history than this, especially if you take the caveats he'd go on to add over the years as clarifications rather than as him downsizing his claims, but at the very least, this is an accurate summary of the portion of Fukuyama's work which made it into the zeitgeist. And it's also worth stressing that the end of history didn't mean the world would stop. It wasn't as though we were reaching turn 500 in a Civ game. Fukuyama made sure to clarify he was more using end as proper direction, and history as the historical process of development or modernization. But that being said, the connotations of this little turn of phrase were not accidental. The unavoidable implication here was that we, the West, had won, and that what would follow would be more or less humanity's epilogue, a continuous happy ending. We'd worked out the fundamentals of life and of society. Maybe things would still change, maybe technology would still advance, maybe every now and then there'd be hostilities, trouble, road bumps on this path, but there was a path, a straight one, with no forks and no turns. Fast forward a few decades, a few hundred years even, the basics would be more or less the same. Fukuyama had written a captivating book, but more than that, he'd given an amount of academic weight to the fervor that animated the West, or at least the Western establishment, throughout the 90s, a fervor which Ellen Mixon's Wood has called capitalist triumphalism, and that can still be glimpsed in much of the period's media. Take, for instance, New Labour's famous 1997 campaign broadcast. Apparently nobody had ever asked the question, is this too on the nose, before the year 2000. And while the decade did see geopolitical and ideological conflicts erupt across the world, more often than not these were seen as those road bumps. The path remained, and it seemed to stretch on for 1,000 years. But why am I telling you all this? Well, a few short years after Fukuyama's book had catapulted him into the spotlight, into television appearances, radio mentions, and public discussion across America, the Fox network came to Matt Groening, the man behind those yellow titans of the 90s imaginary, with a request. Another, please? And what did he come up with?
Oh my god, it's the future. Whoa. A real live robot. I'm gonna be a delivery boy?
Exactly.
All right!
Come on, man. I didn't even fire off no laser.
How does this work?
I'll show you.
Oh, it's a turnstile. Yep.
Is today's hectic lifestyle making you tense? Come relive the carefree days of yore at Pastorama.
No one in New York drove. There was too much traffic.
The end of history almost doubles as an elevator pitch for Futurama. The pilot sees a put-upon delivery boy from 1999 finding himself cryogenically frozen for 1,000 years, awakening into the world of tomorrow. But instead of embarking on a voyage of futuristic discovery, he becomes a put-upon delivery boy once more. He slots right back into place. The premise of Futurama isn't dude of today goes to the future, it's dude of today goes to the future and everything's more or less the same. That sameness is not just in Fry's life, obviously. The pilot also introduces the idea of heads in jars, which is a cool piece of anti-world building, a device which allows Futurama's characters to make historical and pop cultural references which land for the viewer, or rather which land for the original viewer.
I'm your host, Ron Popeil, inventor of Mr. Microphone, the spray-on toupee, and of course, the technology to keep human heads alive in jars.
I don't know who that is. I don't get the joke. I'm a little baby zoomer. But a world where Joan Rivers still presenting events, where Conan is still on tour, where the Beastie Boys are still selling out Madison Cube Garden 1,000 years on, is a world where culture has stagnated. Well, pop culture at least. So what about the deeper stuff? The values of the year 3000 do seem at first glance to be unfamiliar. Take the roadside booths. You know the booths I'm talking about. I'd specify, but saying the word can be a no-no, and I don't really want to get 2 demonetized videos in 1 month, because I like being able to afford food. Anyway, the booths. How different is this world, we wonder, that there's a demand for and widespread acceptance of this service? But then we hear this.
Thank you for using Stop and Drop, America's favorite booth since 2008.
Potential insensitivity notwithstanding, this is a clever little joke. It plays effectively with viewer expectations, but it does something else too, intentionally or not. It underlines the way that outlandish twists on the familiar like this are still twists on the familiar. The way horrific shifts in culture are shocking at first, and then routine. The way, yes, it isn't really that much of a stretch to imagine these booths could have been invented in our time. Euthanasia exists already, and it's hard not to understand the chronic lack of funding and attention our society assigns to the mental health epidemic as anything but a widespread, tacit acceptance of this same problem. If 10 years from now, some startup announced they were producing a similar device, would you really be that surprised? Horribly depressing rabbit hole aside, the point here is the way that significant moral changes or new values in the year 3000 are the exception rather than the rule, and that even then, those new ideas are never as far from ours as they seem. But that end of history pattern can be seen even more clearly in the deeper socio-political fabric of Futurama's world, since that is, what Fukuyama was writing about. We might look to an episode like Season 2's Ahead in the Polls, in which we see that, yes, liberal democracy has prevailed, that not only has it survived, it has thrived. In this world, Fukuyama's prediction has been met. To the letter, liberal democracy has expanded, uniting the world under one system, the system of 20th century America, of the triumphalist 90s. And 1,000 years later, electoral politics remains in the Bill Clinton/Bob Dole identikit model.
I'm against those things that everybody hates. Now, I respect my opponent, but quite frankly, I agree with everything he just said.
Returning to the pilot episode, considering the specifics of its story with Fukuyama firmly in mind, we can see that this pattern was, in some sense, baked in from the very start. As suggested above, this first glimpse of the year 3000 was never that disconcerting, but there were perhaps a few pockets of difference. Sure, Fry returns to his same profession, is still a delivery boy, but here, even the illusion of choice is removed.
Your permanent career assignment.
Delivery boy?
I'm going to implant your career chip. It'll permanently label you as a delivery boy.
The career chip system seems to indicate that there's a fundamental difference in the way this society organizes labor. Maybe there is a different world, a brave, new world hiding behind a familiar facade, one that's continued to evolve and grow beyond the bounds of the 20th century liberal imaginary. Maybe that's supported when you consider Bender's original characterization. Pre-electroshock, the robot we see is internally constrained by his code. Maybe this speaks to an idea in this first vision of the show that the existential condition of the robot is more complex, more unfamiliar than the essentially human characteristics the show would go on to assign them.
If someone programmed you to jump off a bridge, would you do it?
I'll have to check my program. Yep.
Perhaps there are pockets of difference here, but Futurama systematically empties them over the course of this first half hour. Yes, Futurama does kick off with job chips, does seem to signal through them a world that's moved beyond Fukuyama's ideal to find some more advanced, more effective model for society, but by the end of the pilot, the job chips and implicitly that more controlled, deterministic conception of the individual they seem to represent, all that is sidestepped.
We don't have the proper career chips.
Oh, that won't be a problem. As luck would have it, I saved the chips from my previous crew.
More importantly though, Fry, the representative of that 20th century liberal worldview, ends up convincing Leela, who again begins the show as a fate assignment officer, as essentially the 31st century's first point of contact with temporal immigrants, the keeper of this society's last remaining border, as the representative and missionary of this new social order, that this model is wrong, and that Fry's was right.
You gotta do what you gotta do. I'm sorry, Fry, but I have to install your career chip.
Yeah, well, if you're sorry, then why are you doing it?
It's my job.
Your chip, what are you doing?
Quitting, because I've always wanted to. I just never realized it until I met you.
The blueprint of the late 20th century West is proven to be the ideal that will govern the material world in the long run, as Fukuyama predicted. That victory was still won, it's just that kinks have to rework themselves out every now and then, and work themselves out they do. Later episodes, which see characters switching jobs, treat the chips with the same weight as we might employment history. That is, when they're not being sidestepped or forgotten entirely. Here then, Fry 90s thought the philosophy of 20th century liberalism prevails. It's a similar story with Bender's programming. Yes, he begins a robot subservient to his code, suggestive of a world with interesting, unfamiliar robo-social dynamics, but after an electroshock, and perhaps more significantly, a conversation with Fry, Bender is able to go against his code.
It's up to you to make your own decisions in life. That's what separates people and robots from animals.
You were right, Fry. From now on, I'm going to bend what I want, when I want, who I want.
After this point, Bender's condition is essentially a human one, possessing that personal autonomy so foundational to the philosophy of liberalism. So, in a sense, what we see here is a leap in spirit from a robot of tomorrow to a man of today. Once again, 20th century thought prevails over the small pockets of difference the show offers, and that's the way it should be, Futurama suggests. The framing of the case of the career chips and of Bender's rigidity is clear. The audience's sympathy is supposed to lie with Fry. So Futurama seems to show us a different world, but in reality, any difference is skin deep. It's Blurnsball for baseball. It's the tube instead of the subway.
New York Mayor C. Randall Poopenmeyer opens a new tube line to alleviate rush hour traffic.
It's Ultimate Robot Fighting instead of WWE. It's Joe Jackson instead of Bill Clinton. It's the show tossing a futuristic coat of paint on the familiar bones of a 90s sitcom. And there are moments when it seems the writers forget to do even this.
How long do I have to live?
Ooh, dibs on a CD player.
The joke here isn't that Fry still has a CD player in the year 3000, the joke is simply that Bender's so eager to bagsy his theoretically dead friend's stuff. This is what we see again and again. A stifling cultural, ethical, socio-political sameness, hammered home again and again. Thanks to the show's format, we can and do explore truly alien worlds, with truly alien systems. But those worlds, those systems, are just as alien to the humans of tomorrow as they are to the contemporary viewer. For all the talk about the different norms of the 31st century, everything we see deviating from these norms is also deviant to the show's audience. Episode after episode compares now and then, only to find both amount to the same thing, to discover that the blueprint for all our tomorrows is today, or rather, the today of 24 years back. The premise of Futurama isn't 1999 ended, 1,000 years passed, and Fry woke up. The premise is 1,000 years passed, and it's still 1999. It is Fukuyama's end of history. It's the idea that we've reached the endpoint of our social, cultural, political development already, and that, to nab a phrase from the avocado, the rest of eternity will be spent recycling our greatest hits. Futurama isn't about the year 3000. It isn't about the future, it's about 1999. But to a point, the doy, right? Futurama is an ultimately self-reflexive piece of late 90s turn of the millennium culture, dressing up the familiar in the alien. In itself, that's not exactly a bombshell. No, it's a core part of the appeal. It's one of the reasons why it worked. It's Shklovsky's defamiliarization. It's Brecht's alienation effect. It's the presentation of the known as unknown in order to prompt reflection in the audience. As Anais Nin put it in The Novel of the Future, what we are familiar with, we cease to see. The writer shakes up the familiar scene, and as if by magic, we see a new meaning in it. Take the way Fry's outrage at the invasiveness of dream advertisement makes the viewer realize today's equivalents aren't really any better. Speaking of, this video is sponsored by... No, I'm just joking, all the sponsors keep pieing me off. Here's the clip.
Didn't you have ads in the 20th century?
Well, sure, but not in our dreams. Only on TV and radio. And in magazines. In movies. And at ball games. And on buses. And milk cartons. And t-shirts. And bananas. And written on the sky. But not in dreams.
So to make the point that Futurama is about 1999, about an eternal 1999, is not to criticize the show, it's simply to work toward a closer understanding of it. And to be perfectly clear, this was not the reason Futurama worked. That is not the claim I'm making here. There are definitely far more obvious and far more significant reasons the show became a hit, and an enduring classic. A gifted writing staff, a genuinely smart sense of humor with an astounding hit rate, fun world building, even if it is skin deep, a perfect balance between comedy and heart, and not least, a voice cast for the ages, but it was a reason. And when we grant this, the problem becomes clear. Futurama is about 1999. Futurama worked in part because it's about 1999, and it isn't 1999 anymore.
Limit by Russia's full-scale invasion with attacks across Ukraine.
You can see the glass has been shattered there, that glass of the United States Capitol building.
Overall inflation rose to 11.1%.
20% of the future population, around 2 billion people.
It's a move that puts him on the path to becoming leader for life.
So, can Futurama work in 2023? The world that's produced and the world that will receive these new episodes is very different to the world that created Space Pilot 3000. It isn't 1999 anymore, so what do? Do you try to stay current, sliding timescale style, update the future? Well, Futurama did give this idea a look in previously. The Comedy Central seasons often tried to be timely, with episodes like Proposition Infinity, Decision 3012, and especially Attack of the Killer App hitching their wagons to current year referentiality. But those seasons are pretty uniformly held to be Futurama's weakest, and partially for this reason. Johnny Tuccello's, one of YouTube's foremost Futurama authorities, sums up the general sentiment nicely.
It just feels like the show makes a few too many lazy references to whatever was in the cultural zeitgeist when the episodes were being written, whereas most of the time in the original run, the jokes and references end up feeling pretty timeless.
And maybe that reputation is partially due to generally weaker writing in these episodes. Attack of the Killer App, for instance, is almost more a series of iPhone/app culture joke vignettes than it is an actual story, but I don't think that's all of it. If Futurama is to include fictionalized versions of 21st century developments, is to advance its world in tandem with our own, then that earlier sense of stasis, of sameness, stops making any sense. The clarity of that subconsciously Fukuyaman premise gets eroded, not enough to stick out necessarily, but enough to make things feel just a little off. And sure, the logic of Futurama's world was never particularly important. The socio-cultural gap between 1999 and 2009 is short enough that this tension manages to slip under the radar more often than not in the Comedy Central years, but you probably couldn't say the same today. And that's a neat segue to the fact that the alternative option isn't really any better. Rejecting the current, recommitting to a vision of the future as some eternal 1999, it might be the more logically consistent choice, but that wouldn't really work either. In his latest book, Liberalism and Its Discontents, Fukuyama sounds defeated, writes The New Yorker. The review goes on. The most interesting narrative that emerges from the book may be the evolution of its author's tone, from evangelism to damage control. Because now, even to Fukuyama, that liberal democratic victory no longer looks certain. Threats, perhaps existential ones, loom both within and without. Thinking of the growth of neoliberalism, hyper-individualism, and so forth, Fukuyama is clearly flummoxed by the scale at which these threats have escalated, The New Yorker continues. And it seems international developments are also chipping away at his conviction. In After the End of History, Conversations with Francis Fukuyama, the writer admits that if China continues to rise the next 30 years, there is indeed an alternative model to liberal democracy that looks pretty effective. That moment of Western, liberal democratic, capitalist triumph that Futurama crystallized, shot forward, and built its world upon, it's gone. Things did not, in fact, only get better. I can say that. We're in agreement here, right? I mean, I know plenty of people would contest that, not least Fukuyama himself, but even he'd agree, has agreed, that this model of liberal democracy is in profound crisis. To quote the aforementioned Avocado article on the episode Ahead in the Polls, things have changed. I feel as if I spent most of the tens being shocked or surprised by the things the world was capable of, as new and wondrous and horrifying things have emerged, and we've reached a point where you either take a side or find one taken for you. That same episode, produced today, wouldn't be a bitingly successful bit of satire, it'd be a work of baffling naivete. Electoral politics in 2023 isn't John Jackson versus Joe Johnson, and perhaps unlike the 90s, it isn't close enough for that bit to ring true. By and large, the choice we see isn't one craven, ineffectual stiff or another, it's a craven, ineffectual stiff or a cartoon villain. It's, do you vote for the guy who'll break his pledges and fail to improve things, or do you vote for the guy whose whole platform is to make things worse? It's John Jackson or Richard Nixon. It's also been argued that from an economic perspective, liberalism is failing on its own terms. One need not look further than the recent leaps forward in income disparity and wider wealth inequality, or the largely unchecked reign of the too big to fail, too big to jail corporations under neoliberalism to see that there's at least some truth here. And while some, including Fukuyama himself, do like to draw a distinction between liberal economics and neoliberalism, supposing the latter to be a cancerous growth rather than the inherent principles of liberal economics taken to their logical conclusions, let's just say not everyone agrees that's a distinction worth making. What's more, critiques of the sort of assumptions that the end of history and other now-dominant models of history rely on, that history can be understood as a linear progression toward or through capitalist modernity, have gained traction in the past few decades. For instance, Ellen Mexon-Wood's seminal study, The Origin of Capitalism, argues convincingly that capitalism, with all its very specific drives of accumulation and profit maximization, came about as a result of specific, unique political and material conditions in England's early modern agrarian economy, and that it required not only a simple extension or expansion of barter and exchange, but a complete transformation in the most basic human relations and practices. All this is to say, the consensus that underpinned the triumphalism of the 90s, that saw Fukuyama and Futurama mentally project their status quo 1,000 years hence, that allowed these projections to be taken seriously by a mass audience, has fallen away. To once more quote The New Yorker, no longer can anyone say with a straight face that Anglo-American liberal democracy is a timeless good, or the inexorable goal of all modern nation-states. That isn't to say you can't still make that argument, but the fact that you have to make the argument says everything. Since the end of the 20th century, since Fukuyama, since Futurama, that consensus has fallen away, and to many, the end of history appears little more than naive millenarianism, as does anything which takes that idea that an endpoint had been reached even semi-seriously, and that includes Futurama.
If you want to know what it's like 1,000 years from now, this little cartoon will let you know.
Insofar as the show has an underlying ethos, that ethos is exemplified by Pilot Fry, who, despite having been miserable in 1999, convinces the world of the future to play by his 20th century rules, and is right to do so. The show's relationship with that late 20th century American reality is ultimately a positive one, a qualified, critical acceptance, but an acceptance nonetheless, similar to the way most of the classic politically minded episodes of The Simpsons ultimately embrace its admittedly thorny status quo. As with Fukuyama's end of history theory, problems remain, but those problems are eventually surmountable, and belief persists. Futurama in 1999 was often satirical, was sometimes cynical, but always, in the end, landed on an acceptance of its society. As an example, in the season 1 episode A Big Piece of Garbage, the Earth is threatened by a huge ball of rubbish that had been launched into space by a reckless 21st century government and had returned as a life-threatening asteroid of garbage, which is, incidentally, my final form as well. How do our heroes save New York? Well, how do you think?
A second ball of garbage! That just might work! Stop all this pain-in-the-ass recycling and throw your garbage on the floor.
The anti-moral of this episode is that if the future just takes a leaf out of our book, they too can delay their problems indefinitely.
What if the second garbage ball returns to Earth like the first one did?
It's none of our concern. That's the 20th century spirit.
Of course, the episode knows that environmental procrastination is bad, is not the right way to do things. It has Leela express this. The point of the episode is to criticize similarly short-sighted solutions being pursued in the real world, as the fact that the episode knows it's wrong, has Leela stand ineffectually on that soapbox, allows some semblance of moral resolution to be found as the credits roll. Any lingering worries are put to bed by the knowledge that there is some sense to be found in this world, that even when the asteroid returns, a better solution may be on the cards. But remember, the episode isn't really about a future garbage meteor, it's about real-world environmentalism in 1999, and as such, there's a real sense of smug complacency to the commentary. The world's laziness is sending it down a path toward pollution and doom, but you know, it is okay because we're aware of that. You're aware of that, we're aware of it here in the writer's room. There is some sense to be found in this world, and because of this, sooner or later, a better solution may be on the cards. The problem is surmountable. Triumphalism persists, belief persists, or, you know, persisted, because watching this episode 24 years later, in the midst of yet another unprecedented heatwave, as the garbage ball looms overhead, that knowing doesn't do much anymore. The problem seems a lot less surmountable. Belief is fading, or faded. So any attempt to return to this original ethos, to ignore the contemporary world and return to this vision, to return to 1999, will provide a similarly shaky foundation for new episodes. It'll critique a world which no longer exists, one which many viewers won't even remember, and with every step along the way, it'll inevitably remind the viewer of the inaccuracy and short-sightedness of that original premise. Through our lofty-minded analysis glasses, then, it seems that there aren't really any good options here. Any routes this latest reanimation can take that'd lead it to a conceptually satisfying revival. But it has to do something, so what is it doing? Well, let's take a look at the trailer.
A new virus has broken out.
That looks kind of fun. I can't wait to do it hundreds of times.
Pretty lawless out here in crypto country.
It seems then that Futurama's opted for that first option, staying current, updating the future to renegotiate the problems of today, of 2023, 1,000 years on. For the reasons laid out, like 10 minutes ago, this is not an unproblematic decision, but for all the reasons that filled the last 10 minutes, it may well be the less jarring of two jarring options. That is, until you put those glasses back on and look a little deeper. It's been confirmed that the virus episode will be about vaccines, presumably riffing in a humorous way on the debate around them. We've also been promised a crypto episode. Think for a moment about these topics. Compare them to previous instances of Futurama's commentary. Deep-rooted distrust in medical science, in public health control, in government itself, that is not exactly the same as a relatively routine election or proposition, and it's a world apart from phone bad. Crypto, too, is a deceptively significant target. Bitcoin owes its very existence to the libertarian skepticism that followed the 2008 banking crisis, and the links between the recent crypto hype/crash and the financial desperation of those that bought in is well established. These are not neutral topics, these are not road bumps. 2020's Futurama isn't just satirizing current affairs, it's picking up on the very erosion of faith in liberal democratic institutions that Fukuyama is so anxious about, that threatens to undermine the end of history, and by extension, Futurama's original premise. So where does this leave us? If, as this video has argued, the cultural climate, the capitalist triumphalism of the 1990s was an essential element of Futurama's early identity, of its ideas more widely, if the kind of thought typified by Francis Fukuyama's end of history, and the meme-like spread of that phrase into the popular consciousness was a part of what inspired the show, of how it constructed its satire, and of the show's contemporary reception, and if that cultural climate has undergone a major shift, if the assumptions that climate perched atop of have been called into question, decentered, then to work in 2023, conceptually, to ring true, to be able to engage in any remotely meaningful dialogue with the world, the experience of the viewer, Futurama's gonna have to really change, pull something out of the bag in a way that's looking unlikely. That being said, a great many viewers, doubtless some of you, will hear that and say, so what? I do not care. Take those glasses off. If I like the stories, if I like the character stuff, if it makes me laugh, then the Futurama revival will work for me. And yes, I have no doubt that there'll be stuff to like here. And of course, all of that will play a role, maybe even the main role, in whether or not we'll look back on Futurama Season 11, as it's now being stylized 10 years later, as a success or as a failure. If Futurama can work in 2023, it'll work on the strength of its wit, of its imaginative, playful reuse of sci-fi tropes. It'll lean away from Attack of the Killer App and A Head in the Polls, and towards something like Murder on the Planet Express. It'll work in spite of that original premise, and all its ideological baggage. That is, it'll work in a markedly different way to how that first run did. So, to conclude, all that stuff we've spent the last, half an hour talking about, it may not be the reason Futurama can't work today, mainly because, hey, we don't know, maybe it can. But if it can't, if we do end up with zombie Futurama, well, it looks like this'll be a reason for that. Maybe not one every viewer can articulate, or even put their finger on, but it will be there. An uncanny disconnect lurking just behind the show that'll feel even more weird with every year that goes by, that veers off from that straight road. And if this is the case, well, it's nobody's fault. Art reflects the world and the society that produced it. It maybe is a little hubristic to think that anything can be dug up, dusted off, and plugged right back in, a quarter of a century after it was dreamed up, without missing a beat. Dragging an artifact so firmly of its time, from that time, from another world into ours, square peg, round hole style? Can that ever work? Where are the limits of revival culture? Where should they be? I'll leave that one with you guys. Thanks to all of you that have made it this far, really. This is a video I've wanted to make for over a year, and I'm relatively happy with how it's turned out. You know, in an ideal world, this would have been maybe the first draft. I'd have spent a bunch more time making this script the best version of itself it could be, but that's not really something I can afford to do at present. Insert shameless Patreon plug here. That's what had changed this, and hopefully what eventually will. But if you're watching this after it goes out, or if I don't get it done on time and Season 11's already gracing our screens, I'd love to read some thoughts with that new context in mind down below. Please do like, share, all that stuff, and biggest thank you of all to everyone currently backing me on Patreon, especially Daniel Goldhorn, Ryan Emily, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. I am so grateful to the faith and support everyone on screen now has shown me, and I'm doing my best to repay that with banger content. So cheers all for watching, and, you know, bite my shiny metal ass and all that.